if you are here for the Church Size Dynamics workshop, if you could scoot, if you're in one of the back tables, if you could scoot more forward. Yes, I see you shaking your head at me, Aaron. Get a little closer. Get a little closer so we're not talking out to everybody. Come in a little bit, come in a little bit. You're not sinning if you don't do this, unlike the doors. But it's still valuable and important. Thank you. All right. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, thank you so much for being here. This is going to be, we are going to get the benefits of multiple perspectives today, and also probably some of the challenges of several different people talking. So hopefully it emerges into a unified whole. But really, what we're here to talk about is church size dynamics. And when I was talking to Bishop Ken about what he was looking for in workshops at the Synod, was there anything specific that you wanted to have talked about? This was the one that actually came up for him, because as he actually talked about in his bishop's address this morning, this is a need, both in terms of understanding where we are in terms of size in our local churches in the DRM, as well as how do we transition across size points. That is becoming more and more needful and necessary. And although that might sound like a practical, kind of org leadership type thing, there's actually some deeply theological issues in here. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. I'm going to let these guys introduce themselves. They were each chosen to be on this panel because they've been in multiple different size points and transitioned through multiple different size points, which seems important in this conversation. So you guys introduce yourselves, talk about where you are, how long you've been there. I'll give a little bit of introduction, and then we'll go down the line.
Hi, my name's Tim Suits. I'm the rector of Trinity Anglican Church in Littleton, Colorado. Which frankly just kind of very similar history and pattern of the Diocese of the Rocky Mountains. We both began at roughly the same time. We'll celebrate 10 years this April. We were the second church plant out of Wellspring Church. Rob Paris and Ken Robertson and others were sent out for Church of the Advent, which currently is led by Jordan Kaloji, as well as Cindy Hamilton here was part of that launch team. And then we were the second. We've been doing ministry in Littleton ever since. I also run the Three Streams Network, which is the church planting network of the Denver metro area and the western region of the Rockies, even down to Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Hello, my name is Rick Storrs. I'm the rector of Restoration Anglican in Minneapolis. Oh, great. I'm so glad that happened. Thanks.
They were told they must come to this meeting.
Yeah, and they saw me give them a look after your crew gave you a woot. So Restoration is 7 years old. We planted in the fall of 2017. We are a daughter plant of Church of the Cross, which is an ACNA church in Hopkins, Minnesota. So Restoration is the first ACNA church in Minneapolis proper. I'll leave it at that.
My name is Eric Chesney, a church planter, lead pastor of Restoration Anglican Church as well, but here in Colorado Springs, and yes, thank you. We're 5 months old, so we have it all figured out, and we have tons of wisdom to share with everyone here today. Part of the reason I'm on this panel is because I spent the first kind of decade of my vocational pastoral ministry in 5,000 plus multi-site megachurch environment, so I'm going the other direction from big to small. And have some different perspectives in that move as well, and some of the challenges and unique opportunities with that too. So,
and I'm Ken Robertson, International Anglican Church here in Colorado Springs. We are kind of the old fogey of the churches, I think, in this diocese, or one of them with Wellspring. We've been around 23 years. I've been the lead pastor since 2015, almost a decade ago now, and have been in the midst of a growing dynamic season and facing new challenges of facility and multiple services and all those types of things. So that's part of what I bring into this space. A foundational document that we have all engaged with, that if you haven't run across in this conversation, we want to encourage you to, as Bishop John says, Google it. Tim Keller's document, Leadership and Church Size Dynamics. In fact, I would just encourage you right now on your phone, search Tim Keller, Leadership and Church Size Dynamics. It is a wildly helpful document, wildly helpful, with some kind of technical details about different size points and strengths and weaknesses of those size points and what to do when you find yourself in those situations. We thought about, for this workshop, just regurgitating, in one sense, what's in that. And we're like, they can read that. We're not going to do that. So we're gonna try to sum up some of those things, but just know, like, highly encourage you to check out that document. It's really helpful. Two kind of foundational assumptions that we bring into this space. I think that's important to say and important for us to all to realize. One is that there are no wrong or right church sizes. There are no wrong or right church sizes. Sounds very obvious. Leads into principle number 2. Pretty much everybody thinks there are right or wrong church sizes. Right? This is something that I think as pastoral leaders we carry with us. It's definitely something our congregants carry with them. Not that they'll come out and say, like, I really think we need to be this big as a church. But comments that are said like, we used to be so relational and welcoming. Man, why don't we have this program? Those are both church size questions, church size comments with value judgments tied into them. And one of the things we want to encourage in this space is a recognition of who we are as a church doesn't have to shift as we cross different size places. The ways we express who we are definitely has to shift across different size points. Because the reality is that each church size has strengths and it has weaknesses. It has vulnerabilities and it has opportunities. Good leadership is recognizing what the vulnerabilities and opportunities are at each different church size and leading in a way appropriate to that. And then transitioning the congregation and our own styles of leadership as we're moving between those different sizes. So fundamental assumptions, there are no wrong or right church sizes, and everybody kind of thinks there is, and we're always kind of navigating that internally, and our own sense of accomplishment or shame or whatever that is around those dynamics, okay? Now, we do believe that this is spiritual work, and this is something that as we talked about this, that we really had a sense of like, this is important to say, that it's not like there's the spiritual side of church and then the non-spiritual side of church. We've asked Tim if he would lead us into a little bit of pastoral theology of organizational leadership here and how this is actually part of our shepherding role.
Thanks, Ken. I just want to say yes and amen to everything Ken just said, is that in the Diocese of the Rocky Mountains, we often talk about being 3 streams Anglican very regularly. Maybe that's not the language we all use, but that is a historic language that we have adopted over the years. That we are a people led by Spirit, Word, and Sacrament, right? We are alive in the Spirit. We are historically reformed. We believe in the formative power of the Word preached to create us, to form us, to recreate us in the image of Christ. And we are rooted in the great tradition and the sacraments of the church. But here's something interesting that I would propose to you. Bishop Ken has a 4th stream that he deeply values that often is not a stated value, but it is there. And there's a 4th stream, and it's called organizational leadership. Truly, that I think the churches that we often look at that are alive in spirit, word, and sacrament, there is often a great deal of energy and effort in work of the Holy Spirit in and through a leader in the difficult task of organizational leadership. Organizational leadership is not what you do once you sell out. Organizational leadership is not once you do, what you do when you get tired of people. Organizational leadership is what you do to care for people. Ultimately, it is a way of shepherding your flock, because at the end of the day, we don't want anyone to fall through the cracks. And the organizations that we are shepherding are all about how we don't let people fall through the cracks, so we continue to care for them. And there's an image that I just really want to encourage you on that has been helpful for me. And this is coming from one of our church planters, Jesse Blaine, who's a very insightful individual. I would go to his church if I could. I'm kind of busy with church stuff. But he said, Tim, you know, what I've noticed is that different denominations have different giftings of the Spirit. And different denominations pull. Very similar to like Spirit, Word, and Sacrament. It's like an obtuse triangle. Normally, a church really lives deeply into two of those, but rarely all three. They live into all three, but normally two pull, right? And same thing, I think, with denominations. And so, you know, your Presbyterians, deeply prophetic office, a people characterized by the Word. Some of the best preachers you'll find, Timothy Keller. Presbyterians, Word people, right? Anglicans, I think we're the best pastors, right? We're priest people. We're called priests, for those of us that are called to that vocation. We love to sit with people, hear people, listen to people. And my friends in the Baptist church, I would say, are very kingly, the organizational side. But here's something that I've noticed in many of us. We have a strong theology of the prophetic office, my role as a preacher and teacher, the priestly office, my role as a shepherd of souls. But many of us feel deeply unformed or unconfident. Unconfident? Inconfident? Not confident. A lack of confidence in the kingly office. And here's the reality, brothers and sisters. We are all called as image bearers of Christ and as representatives of him in our ordained offices to reveal Christ himself, who perfectly fulfills the prophet, the priest, and the king that we never can. But we are all continually called to be formed into his likeness under the crucible of pastoral leadership. And so all I want to do is encourage you today is to recognize that your calling is not simply prophetic, it is not simply priestly, it is also kingly. And there are times in our lives where we feel deeply unprepared for it. Seminary prepared us for the prophetic, probably didn't prepare us that much for the priestly, but didn't prepare us at all for the kingly. And so do you have a theology that would open you up to actually see yourself as fully alive in the role of carrying this office of prophet, priest, and king as you are united to your great prophet, priest, and king, King Jesus? That you are actually invited into something that is beautiful, something that is worthy, and is not selling out. So I think that actually has to be the first step in many of our hearts, is a posture shift to see that this is actually central to our calling and our vocation as ministers of the gospel.
Thank you so much, Tim. And I think this idea of being trained up, being developed in this, right? I think that's right on. You made the comment a few minutes ago that we need coaches, we need trainers to help us in this. I mean, I can point out a person or two in this room who have been instrumental in leading me into that. But I would love to hear about your experience with coaches, trainers, mentors in these spaces and how important that is.
Absolutely. So here's the other piece. Is sometimes we can feel like the kingly office can be like, oh man, am I just becoming a seeker-sensitive church, right? Am I just going to build systems that just feed systems? We are all called. The image that Christ Jesus uses, right, for like the church is the vine and the branches. I have a friend who owns a vineyard. It is an incredibly complicated interplay between an organism and an organization, right? He does unbelievable preparatory planning, right? And normally, interestingly enough, the trellis that the vines are on is always outpacing where the vine is itself. And so you might feel like you're walking in your dad's shoes a little bit. Our organization's getting too big. Well, if it's not feeling a little bit too big, then you're probably not going to be able to grow into anything, by the way. And that was something I had to learn, as I had to have a coach help me overcome imposter syndrome of saying I'm overbuilding the organization for the size of the organism. And the coach had to teach me, actually, there's nothing for the organism to grow into unless you build out beyond what you need. I lead a church planting network, and so my functional responsibility is to be a brother and a cheerleader and somebody that cares for our planters spiritually as best as I can, which some days I wonder how good that is. But my role is like, I listen to someone say, hey, ministry is really hard. And I'm like, yeah, ministry is really hard. Oh yeah, by the way, we hired you a coach to say, what are you gonna do about it? Jared, where are you, Jared? Jared right here. Raise your hand higher than that, Jared. Jared is incredible. He is our coach. He coaches all of our planters. Kyle, would you 2 thumbs up, right? Yep. You need a Jared in your life. If you are saying, I don't know how to break through a barrier, there's an imposter syndrome to say, hey, I don't want to get bigger than I need to be, but there's also the fear of admitting failure. And sometimes hiring a coach feels like I'm admitting failure because now I have to admit to my vestry, I don't know what to do. May the Lord liberate you and free you from that, as Rick talked about. What do you need freedom from this morning? You need freedom from that fear, and you need to hire a coach that is outside of your organization to be able to give you clarity to say, here's actually where you need to grow. The Lord wants you to have freedom in that, because the lies the enemy gives you around organization, health, can be overwhelming at times. All of us feel like we're failing. Like, okay, so how many of you have been a parent, right? I was an awesome parent when my son was 6 months old, and then he turned 9 months old. And then I figured that out. And then he turned 1 year old. And then I figured that out. But then by the time I figured that out, he was 2. And the whole time you're feeling like I am failing. I am utterly failing because this thing that I figured out now isn't that anymore. So often that is what church growth feels like. It always changes, and you need somebody to help.
Amen. Amen. Now, what we've done is we've kind of broken up some principles of what this looks like, maybe as we're growing, as we're approaching a growth barrier. If you're really curious about like where your church is and what this might look like in some of those transitions, I want to point you to that Tim Keller doc, Leadership and Church Size Dynamics. It breaks it up by different sizes, 100, 200, 400, 800, some of these transition points. And we can talk about that in some of the Q&A later. But
In some of the ASA, those are dated numbers because ASA is dropping considerably. Of committed Christians are coming to church less, so you might have to figure out a 20% variance on that.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point, Tim. What we've tried to do, though, is to pick out a couple pieces of organizational life that are going to transcend any particular turn, right? There's going to be different ways that you need to grow in this if you're going across the 200 barrier versus if you're going across the 400 barrier, but the basic principle is the same. And so I've asked these guys each to take 1 or 2 and to lay that out for us and what that's looked like in their context. So Rick, why don't you go first?
Yeah.
Lead us into one of these 4 principles.
Sure. So what I'm talking about is teams, an equipping mindset. What we're called to do is equip the saints for ministry, right? It's not our job to do absolutely everything that happens at the church. And the more stuff that we can give away, the more people's gifts are being used, the more joy that they're experiencing, the health of the parish. So I'm just going to list off a couple of things that we try to value at our church, and I know you all do too, but I think it helps to say this stuff out loud. But in our context, we firmly believe in easy on-ramps. If someone is coming and they're excited about the church, we want them to be able to get involved very, very quickly. Now, again, there's a pastoral responsibility to that. Sometimes people are coming and you also need to just say, hey, here's a chair. It's totally cool for you to chill out for 6, 12 months. But then sometimes as you're talking to people, you can tell, like, they're here, they're on fire, they're thrilled, and they've got gifts that you ought to use in that context. So, especially in our early days, when we were a portable church meeting in a gymnasium, it was not uncommon for someone to come and then 2 weeks later, they're a greeter. They're handing out, bulletins and stuff. And there's just a fun delight that comes with that. Also, I think a name of the game is delegation. If there is something that you can delegate, do it. And again, sometimes as clergy, it's like there's a little bit of like, I don't know. I just think that sometimes that can be a struggle, right? So in our context, that was, if there's qualified, dear people who are experienced and well-trained, I'd put them in the pulpit every now and then. Scripture readers, all that sort of stuff. We just try to delegate as much as we possibly can. One of the ways that we honor volunteers is by having very clear documentation. So every team that we create has just a simple one-page, maybe two-page Google Doc, just so that when someone signs up for something, they know exactly what's expected of them. And one of the things that I love hearing from folks is, oh, it's really easy to get plugged in here, and I know what's expected of me during that time. And then lastly, and this is one of the fun things about being in this diocese, because I know that there is a culture of this, but being quick to laugh at your own mistakes. There's one that's just fun, like your people should know the sound of your laughter. They need to hear joy from you, and when there's mistakes, just to laugh about that. I mean, it's easy for us to kind of hyper-focus on excellence, but my goodness. I once was in a church where the deacon told me, we can't afford to make mistakes, and that was just so soul-crushing. And so I hope that the opposite is true in our context, because that's going to be creating a culture of hospitality, a culture of invitation, a culture of joy. So these are things that I think go into play when you're forming your teams and you're equipping people.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Rick. I think that's right. A couple of things that have stuck with me over the years in this vein. On the delegation piece, I had a warden tell me, if they can do it 75% as well as you can, you've already waited too long to let them do it. Because there's training that can happen there, right, in that space. And that doesn't apply to everything, but I think it's a good sense of what does this look like. As you move to a different size point, I've found as a pastor, your control decreases. And that's scary, right? There's something really good spiritual formation happening there in terms of your own spiritual formation, but there's something really healthy about watching people rise up and the joy of that. The other comment I would say on the teams piece that we experienced at IEC is most people think of sabbaticals as being for the pastor's spiritual health. Completely agree. Totally great. There's another whole side of using sabbaticals for the church's organizational health and growth, and really fostering a team mindset as opposed to it's all on the pastor, especially when you're hitting some of these size points. We reorganized everything we did at IEC when I went on sabbatical for the 6 months prior, and I came back to a very different job and a much healthier church. So just as you're thinking about sabbaticals, think about those as opportunities to live into that.
And that doesn't even need to wait for a sabbatical. We take a 3-week vacation every summer, and we did that the first summer after we planted, and it was terrifying because things are kind of held together by shoestrings and whatever. But exactly, I just want to give more testimony to that. Like when we came back to a healthier church. Henry Nouwen talks about the ministry of absence. It's so beautiful. It's like, yeah, great.
Eric, systems,
Yeah,
processes,
systems.
they're so fun.
They are. They can be. My first ministry job, I took over student ministries that had a middle school ministry of about 30 kids meeting on Thursday night, and high schools meeting in a home, about 40 of them on a Wednesday night. And within 3 years, I had 3 different house groups with 40 to 50 high school students in them, all meeting on the same night, and 130 middle school students also now meeting on the same night, which meant none of that was dependent upon me. Massive team of leaders, point people and teachers and games, and I hated it. Because I felt like, man, all I'm doing is putting chairs in circles and walking out of a room, and everyone else is doing all the fun things. I got in ministry because I wanted to be with the students. I wanted to be with the people, and I'm just running these systems. And at some point, I got really fed up with it and said, man, what would it look like for me just to disciple people, just to like meet with students and pour the word into them? So I started like just brainstorming on a napkin and realized I had redesigned the very system that I was running. But I got trapped in just running a system for the sake of running a system instead of being focused on discipleship and using it as a system to actually accomplish what I was wanting to do. And so a system wasn't bad so long as we used the system to serve our ultimate end. Not just what are we doing, but why are we doing this? And so simple things like attendance tracking is a system and a process. I transitioned to one church and walked up on an intern who had an Excel spreadsheet open in front of them with all the names of the students on one side, a single date at the top with one column, and they were deleting the date and putting a new date in place and deleting all the check marks. And I'm going, what are you doing there? Oh, I'm getting ready for attendance next week. What about last week? Oh, we don't keep that. So if I wanted to know how many people were there last week, where would I go to find that? Oh, yeah, we don't have that. And the pieces of paper, oh, we throw them away. You're going to want to go get that out of the trash. And what we did is we not only took attendance for how many people were there, we had names on the paper. Who is there? Are there 10 people in your group each week? Great. Are they the same 10 people? Or a brand new 10 people every week? What's happening to all the other people? And we also tracked our contact work. Did you meet with the student? Did you call them? Did you write them a note? Did you text them? How are you engaging? Attendance is the what. We want to measure the why. Why are we doing this? Well, we believe relational discipleship matters. It's not programs and activities and buildings that make disciples. It's disciples that make disciples. And so it was all an excuse to put students in relationships with loving adults that would teach them the ways of Jesus and walk with them. And so we wanted to measure that thing. And so what we discovered is if contact work dropped off, within about 2 weeks, attendance started plummeting. And if you re-upped your contact work, it took about 3 to 4 weeks before the attendance would then turn and rise to meet the contact work as why. And so we're not just measuring like buildings and butts and budgets and those numbers, right? That's the what of the ministry. Why are we doing what we're doing? We need systems to support the why as well. And so as we have kind of begun as a church plant, the question was, what systems do we need to go ahead and establish that we can grow into these things? And so being 5 months old, we have like 20 kids coming to our kids ministry on the weekends, but we already have 20 volunteers serving in the kids ministry. And we have an onboarding system that we walk through, and everyone's onboarded the same way. We have lots of people serving in our worship team and the music team, and so we use things like Planning Center and Check-In, and we're trying to put 2 months out in advance and scheduling everyone so people know what they're signing up to do. We have some incredible musicians that can show up Sunday morning and just figure it out and wing it. We have other musicians that aren't that great, and if they don't know what songs they're singing 3 or 4 weeks out, they're not going to be able to rehearse and learn the things and get involved as well. And so we want systems to support people who are jumping in and serving and growing in that as well. And so one of the things I realized is that if pastoral ministry is totally dependent upon just me, that's going to be a very limited ministry. But if we could create systems and processes to multiply myself, where delegation isn't just dumping, it's actually developing people. Right? And you can feel guilty that, man, I'm just dumping this thing that I hate doing on someone else, when in reality you find other people going, man, I love doing this thing that you hate doing, and I'm way better at it than you are, Eric, so let me just do it for you. And when I get out of the way and build teams and systems and processes, the ministry has flourished and grown as a result of that.
Thank you, Eric. We're going to have time for Q&A, so as you've got questions, as you're thinking through these things, write them down so we can come back to them, because I think we're on track for that. Tim, I would love for you to speak to an area that I think is one of the trickiest to talk through, which is this idea of excellence in terms of ministry and excellence in what we're doing, maybe specifically like in a worship setting at various size points and what that looks like and the importance and value of that. He volunteered for this one, by the way, so we're not putting this on.
I did.
You did?
I forgot about that. Do you remember that, Rick? I don't remember me saying that. I think that's actually on you, Ken. You got to talk about this one. The importance of excellence. Here's how I would think about it. We all have different standards of what is excellent, right? And often that assessment of like what is excellent is indicated and is tied to a size. Like when we started our church, so Kyle was our youth and family pastor for years, but he was with us almost from the very beginning. He took a 1-year internship at Wellspring and then came back. But he instituted at the very beginning of our church Youth and Family Sunday. And so we would have little girls and little boys get up and read the Holy Scriptures. Even they would sit there with their mom or dad and even be chalice bearers and things. It was very sweet. And at that size dynamic, that was actually viewed as a high degree of excellence. And now we would have to do a huge amount of planning for that to not come off as utter chaos and a mess, given our current space, because size dynamics matter, right? And what once was something that could be done with excellence, you might still be tethered to the belief that, oh yeah, we can still do that. That actually might be a moving target. And here's what I would just encourage you to think through, is that our church is committed to a growth mindset, not simply for our church, but for our leaders. And therefore, our leaders are always growing and seeking out being the most excellent they can be at the vocation that they've been given, right? Do they get it? Do they want it? And do they have the competency to do it? And I would say excellence in itself is going to be a moving target. And you might feel like, hey, this is something that we just loved, and it was perfect, and it was so us. And now it feels like a disaster. Is there something wrong with us? There might not be something wrong with you. Your size dynamic might have just shifted. And you need to accommodate the new dynamic, because what was excellent might not be anymore.
Yeah, to build off that, one of the examples that Tim Keller uses in this document, which I think is helpful, relates to musicians, right? And a musician, we'll call him Bobby. In a small church, everybody knows who Bobby is. Everybody knows Bobby's bad. It's fine. We kind of like Bobby being bad. We kind of like having a band where Bobby can be bad. That's very welcoming and encouraging, and actually creates a sense of safety. More people come in the room who don't know Bobby and who don't know the story about why Bobby's bad. And it actually, at a certain size point, starts to create the exact opposite reality, is it creates the opposite of safety and security, that these people know what they're doing and they're competent to proclaim the gospel. And there's a grief in that. There's a sadness in that. There's something lost in that. But by actually doing the same thing at two different size points, you work against the very sense of safety and security that you were trying to create in the beginning. And so it's some of these dynamics, right, that we have to navigate through, that we have to process through, that we have to grieve, and that we have to press forward, remembering, what is the goal of this thing? What is this about who we are? We're trying to create a space where people can feel safe, secure in our competency to proclaim the gospel and stay with us. That might look a little different at this size point than it looks at this size point. And that deserves grieving, but we've got to think through those things. And that's where some of that excellence comes in.
Yeah, and I think that's really well said, Ken. And I would encourage you that as you walk that transition, you have to bravely walk it, because there will be people in the room that are experiencing extreme loss and will moralize your shift. And so you will actually find people that were your advocates are no longer your advocates, and they're saying, Tim is selling out, Ken is selling out, you are selling out, and your role is I actually know all the new people, and all the new people are deeply put off by what we are doing and don't understand it, and it's actually alienating them. I'm actually responsible for everyone here. And so two things: you are always called to bravery. That is part of being a leader, is bravery. And two, accepting being misunderstood. You have to accept being misunderstood. That is in your job description, whether you like it or not.
I don't think it's in my job description. Maybe it should be. Yeah. No, I think that's right. But I think that's a particularly hard one.
It will be painful.
Yeah. I think it's a particularly hard one. And as we press into those things, as we have certain expectations for behavior, we're going to need goals, and we're going to need accountability to those goals. Eric, talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, goals and accountability. The old saying, if you aim at nothing, you will hit it. It's really true. And I think for some reason we can over-spiritualize this in the church and go like, we're just going to follow the Spirit. We're going to be in tune with what God's doing. It's my job as a pastor not to like make things happen, but just to pay attention to what God's doing in our midst. And that is true, but we also need goals. I love quoting C.S. Lewis as much as I can. I love quoting Eugene Peterson. Today I get to quote Eugene Peterson quoting C.S. Lewis. So there we go. He says, "It was a favorite theme of C.S. Lewis that only lazy people work hard. By lazily abdicating the essential work of deciding and directing, establishing values and setting goals, other people do it for us. Then we find ourselves frantically at the last minute trying to satisfy half dozen different demands on our time, none of which is essential to our vocation, to save off the disaster of disappointing someone. If you do not set goals, someone else will set them for you, and then you will be enslaved to them. And so it is our job to set clear goals, to know where it is we're aiming at. You can't just shoot an arrow into the wall and walk over and draw a target around it and go, look, we hit it, right? And so many times I've been in churches where it's like, we're just going to try something new. And we're going to try something new. And we're going to try something new. And it's not being courageous, it's being lazy. They never actually do anything because they're always just trying something new. And I've discovered and found this to be true in my own kind of pastoral ministry in life, that we often overestimate what we can accomplish in 1 year and underestimate what we can accomplish in 3 years. Sometimes we don't need to try something new. We need to stick with the thing we said we were going to do and haven't yet done. And so that creates a tension for some of us, because some of us would fall on the like faithful side of this spectrum, right? Like, I'm just doing the thing that God's called me to do, and the outcomes are out of my control. It's up to God. Right? One person plants, one person waters. God's the one that gives the growth. True. But there's also this sense of like, we also want to be fruitful. Like, if what we're doing isn't producing fruit, we should stop doing it. But how long do you keep doing the thing before you find the fruit that you're looking for? I think sometimes we just get discouraged and lazy, and so we give up. Other times, there are clear goals we've set, but no one's doing the thing that we all said we were going to do. So what do? I need to have another vision casting meeting. I need to maybe say it more clearly or more passionately. No, they heard you. You're just not holding them accountable, so no one cares. And so this is what happens in cultures. Here's this new thing. Yeah, we'll see how long that lasts. Everyone just keeps their head down and their mouth shut, and 3 months later we move on and we're trying something else new. And so we need systems and processes in place to clearly define what our goals are, and then how do we hold ourselves and our team accountable to accomplishing those things. And for some reason, we're just really weird in the church. Like, we are afraid of numbers for some reason. Like, we don't want to look at the scoreboard. Like, if you ever played ping pong with Pastor Ken in his garage, which I'm sure you guys all do regularly, when he's warming up, it's
Every Monday at 4:30.
It's all fun and games, right? But as soon as the game actually starts, now we're keeping score. Right? Now this thing matters. Like, this has happened in high school sporting events. The scoreboard goes out, and within 15 minutes, no one's paying attention to the game anymore. People are just chatting in the stand because I don't know what's going on. Are we ahead? Are we behind? Are we losing? Are we winning? If we're not tracking these things in the church, we don't know where we are. We don't know what game we're playing. Do we need to like really lean in? Do we need to calm down and relax? Like, what's the scoreboard telling us? And so I think we don't need to be afraid of numbers and these metrics. What is our goal? Is it going to be a 1-year thing, a 3-year thing? And then what type of systems of accountability do we need to put in place to make sure we're actually accomplishing those things? And not just going, oh, we tried. God must not be in this. Let's go try something else. And so one of the things that I found most helpful, there's a book called 4 Disciplines of Execution. Chris McChesney, I think, and I'm not just saying it's a great book because his name sounds like mine. It's really, really good. He talks about lead measures and lag measures. A lag measure is something that has happened in the past and you cannot change. A lead measure is something that can actually influence and determine what might happen in the future. And so back to this attendance tracking analogy. Who was there last week? That's a lag measure. There's nothing I can do to affect who came to church this past Sunday. How are we following up with new people? I can call them every Monday or Tuesday. I can schedule coffees with new people. That is a lead measure, something I can do intentionally that may influence whether someone feels welcome and wants to come back to the church or not. And so you can track successfully am I executing on the lead measure, and is it actually producing a result on the lag measure? And if it's not, then you can change the lead measure, right? But just having some system of accountability where as a team you're sitting down, what did we agree to do this past week on the lead measure sides of things? Did we call the 10 people we said we were going to call? Did we have coffee with people? And then you can measure how is that actually impacting the lag measure as well.
I think his church is going to be bigger than ours pretty soon. Yeah, it's going to be bigger than ours pretty soon.
This has been a really hard place for IAC as we've processed through this measuring things because it felt very antagonistic to our culture. But one of the things we've realized is everybody's counting something. If you're not counting anything, what you're actually counting is butts and bucks, or a number of positive comments that were spoken to you on the side, right? You're always counting something. It's just who we are as humans. Can we count things? Can we have goals that are in the specific direction of what we're trying to do? Otherwise, the implicit goal becomes, oh, there were a ton of people here. That was good. Maybe. Maybe not. There can be more intentionality about, are we actually living into what God's given us to do, and some creative ways of counting and setting goals and then holding people accountable to it that matter. So teams and equipping mindset, systems and processes, excellence and follow through, goals and accountability. We realize that we're just like blowing through some huge things that really take coaching and development and all those kinds of things. But I think some of the obstacle is interior to some of these, like not only the how to, but the want to, and the willing to, and even the excited to. And so we're just trying to give a frame for how some of this matters in terms of the kingdom work that we all share and that we all care about. We've got some more minutes here. We've got a good amount of time. We got 20 minutes. So I've got the mic, and I'm gonna bring it around. Feel free to ask some questions. If you want to do it about your specific like church context, great. But let's ask some questions that are helpful to the group. We don't want to assume that everything we've said is massively helpful.
For our context, it would be helpful if we knew what the ASA was for the four of you, knowing you come from different churches.
We specifically didn't say that because everybody moralizes church size. So what I would say is, let's just say what size points we've been through, right? Let's put it that way. I've been everything from 50 to now a little bit north of 600.
ASA?
ASA.
Yeah,
Average
so
Sunday
I've been
attendance.
from 90 to 4. 90 to 400.
Four people.
Yeah, 4 people. Well, we're a little below that, but yeah, that general area.
Yeah, 70 to 450.
5,000 to 96.
And nothing in between. Yeah. Okay, is that helpful? Okay.
Hello. Can you speak at all to counseling, caring for people who might be dealing with fear about their church size? For example, I used to be part of a big church. X, Y, and Z horrible thing happened. I found your church when it was small. The church seems to be changing size. Could those bad things happen again?
Did you want me to answer that, Deacon Ashley?
Anybody up there? Anybody up there?
Yeah, no, it's so hard because, along with the lines of the moralizing things, at least in our context, people are also coming with previous church experiences. And so right now we're bumping up against a barrier, sort of a transition point. We're about to roll out 3 services next month in March, and our people are just emotionally all over the place. Some people are really thrilled about this, and some people are like really, really scared. And so what we've tried to do is name that in our parish meetings. We've had a couple over the course of this announcement. We've just tried to tell people like it's okay to grieve some things. Now, if we're sort of stewing on that stuff, like we should probably spend some more time to chat about it. But in the same way in which you watch your child grow up and go through different stages. There's grief to missing some of those stages. Like I really love that 6-month stage. I think babies are awesome there, and none of my kids are there anymore, and I grieve that. But it would be weird if I still talked to them as if they were 6-month-olds, So that's kind of what I mean by giving people space to emotionally process stuff, and then also just creating space to have. And a lot of this is just individual conversations. Asking people, okay, so that potlucks, like immediately after the church service, why did you love that? What was amazing about that? When you're 3 services, you can't have potlucks immediately after the service. It doesn't work. But you can figure out what the why is, and you just keep asking, why, until finally you arrive at this root value that's like, yes, like that's not changing. Like being together, eating together, laughing together, and enjoying like all the wacky food that people bring. Like there's still going to be a place for that. It's the expression of that value is just going to look a little different. We'll do it at a different time slot or something like that. So yeah, I'd just say a lot of pastoral conversations and giving space for people to air their emotions. And then I hope I've also been clear about stuff. Like just my own grieving. I'm not standing up in front of the church telling them like this is 100% like awesome. I'm thrilled about everything. I'll tell them like, yeah, I really miss the gymnasium days. I miss those days when we all could fit in the same room and worship together. Like there's things that I like about that, but so I'm trying to be transparent about that. But then saying, God is calling us to now move into this next mode.
Yeah, I think it's important too that we are careful how quickly we go along with people with big church bad or small church bad, right? It's easy for us to demonize people on the other side. Go, oh, that would never happen here. Oh man, now we're growing into that thing. Okay, I just promised them we're not going to be that thing, right? And so really hearing the pain and identifying what that thing is. Coming out of large churches, I have my own church hurt as well, and I've seen the belly of the beast, and there was a lot of fear of like, man, I'm going to become that guy. And something that was really helpful that Pastor Ken told me is like, Eric, you're going to hurt people. You're not going to avoid that, right? These are the ditches pastors fall into. But because of your experience, you're going to recognize it quickly and you'll repent quickly. And so when these things happen here, what are we going to do about it? What is our response going to be? We're not going to be a perfect church where nothing gets screwed up, but how do we respond to those things? And so I think if we can separate like what was actually wrong in that moment, detached from the size, right? And small churches can hurt people just as quickly as large churches. And so I think that's important to really identify what's actually gone on and grieve that, lament that, and go, and here's the ways that we may also fail you in that. But let's name how we're going to respond in those moments. One of the things we did early on as a kind of core team practice was this exercise of having everyone stand up and look at each other in silence for a minute, which is really awkward. And then turn around and change 3 things about yourself, and then turn back around and try to identify and find out what that it was, right? And then we make them do it again. They're like, oh man, it's a lot harder to do it the second time.
Can you tell Eric was a youth pastor?
Yeah, experiential learning, it's helpful. And then we debrief that, right? And it's odd because no one usually ever asks other people to borrow something or help them change. We all think that the resources I have are the only resources I have. We don't lean on community in this time of transition and change. Then as everyone is sitting back down and you're debriefing this, how quickly did everyone go right back to the way they were before? If it doesn't feel strange, it isn't change. And with change comes loss, and with loss there is grief. And when you're in a present moment of grief, it usually hooks past grief and pulls it into this present moment as well. And so when you're the person who's leading through change, you're suddenly guilty of everything every other person has done to this person in their past. And you have to be able to wade into those waters with them and grieve and lament and name it. There is change, and it does feel strange. But we can also hold on to the goodness of who we've been and step into the new things God has for us as well.
Yeah, and Ashley, right? Ashley, yeah. So your church is growing. You've joined a team. You're the pastoral care pastor, right, of the team. Is that right? The community life. Okay. Same thing, different word, right? And you're growing a lot. I wouldn't be surprised if you're going to enter into a pretty painful season because you're not going to bat 1,000. And no matter how well you communicate, we are not changing our values. People who walk into your doors are still going to have value and size tethered together, whether you want to or not. And you can pastor them as well as you can, and they will still walk. And the cost of leaving, the larger the church becomes, the less friction there is to head out. And so that is an incredibly painful thing. I used to remember moralizing my friends' larger churches that saw huge amounts of attrition. And said, man, there must be some real systems problems there. We don't face that. We're 120 people. Why? Because it would be really hard to leave a church of 120 people. You're going to pay a big social consequence, right? Just sociologically speaking. And that shifts when the church gets bigger. And so I do think you might need good friends around you in that season to be able to talk through it. I thought I just said everything right, and they still walked. There's probably something you could grow from in that, and there might also have been things you couldn't have prevented amidst it too.
So well said. I saw you over here, Lisa.
I keep putting my hand up and then bringing it down, putting it back up. This question is actually kind of related, but not to do with like programs or things changing like the way that we do them, but actually like pastoral care specifically. So I'm haunted by a gal who came to our church from a larger church, and she basically said the pastor didn't know his sheep anymore. Like the church had gotten so big that like the pastor didn't even know me. And so am I really gonna call that guy like when I'm in the hospital? Like he doesn't even know me. And as a church gets bigger, are your only options basically to hire more pastors? Or can you speak to some programs, processes, empowering others, maybe lay leaders? Like help me think through how you scale up actual like high-touch pastoral care for a larger church.
Such a good question. I just want to say on the front end before we get some specifics, I remember a conversation with Bishop Ken very clearly, where I was in that space of moving from like shepherd to rancher in some of those ways in terms of church size, and him saying, Ken, it's not your job to know every single person. It's your job to make sure every single person is known. And that shift in terms of my role as a head pastor was significant. But how do you do that thing?
That's what I was going to say. I was going to quote the bishop, just to be clear. That's not my line. It's not my line.
I think the article addresses this in that if you are a pastor of a church with 50 people and you don't know everyone's name, you're not doing your job. And if you're the pastor of a church of 5,000 and you know everyone's name, you're not doing your job. Right? And so the job does shift at those size points. And there's grief, I think, for everyone in that potentially. It may be that this person's identifying, I just want to go to a certain size church if I want access to my pastor who's standing in the pulpit and preaching each week. And so it's a different job at different size points. That's just the reality of it in terms of what you're actually doing as an individual. But again, it's not the pastor's job to do all the work of the ministry, but to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. And so what do your small groups and your life groups look like in terms of providing pastoral care? What kind of staffing do you have to care for people in that way? And this goes back to the kind of that systems and processes thing as well. When we were in a ministry where we really value that relational touch point and having pastors available to people, our team thought, man, we need like 3 or 4 more pastors. We needed an admin. Pastors create work. Admins get it done. And we had all these pastors doing all these things that they were horrible at. They were taking all this time away from being present to people. Why are these 5 pastors spending 7 hours each trying to put their expenses together at the end of the month? Like one person can do that in 15 minutes for them. Now you just created all this hours of pastoral care for other people. And sometimes like, well, I don't want to make other people do, I need to do all that. No, stop doing what you're not good at. Let someone else who's really good at that be good at that, and you are freed up to go care for people. And so sometimes you staff your value, sometimes you staff your anti-value to free other people up to actually live into what you really care about as a church. So I think there's different ways you can go about making sure people have access to pastors or pastoral care, but it necessarily needs to look different at different size points.
Yeah, I think also as a rector, you kind of hit a certain point where you have to be very specific about who it is that you're focusing on. So we went through a phase where I would focus mostly on, the staff and other leaders, and then also like newcomers, like that. Those would kind of be my areas. And then also one of the fun things of growing is that you begin to develop a team who have different pastoral gifts. And so as someone comes to you, your response can sometimes be like, I'm actually not the best person to process this with, but Aaron totally has these gifts, he has this experience, like it'd be really awesome if you went and chatted with Aaron about this. And that's such a gift to your congregation. Yeah.
I'd like to not answer your question and answer how you phrase the question. Because we all do this, sister. I have a wounded person that comes to my church, they express me to their wounds, and I'm haunted that I am never one of the villains in their story. I want to care for them. I don't want that story to continue here. And what I would encourage you, sisters, and maybe it's the same wavelength you're on, I would encourage you to be liberated from that fear, that we cannot allow the fear of being another villain in somebody else's story to drive how we schedule ourselves or what problems we face. Rather, we set the agenda as we hear from God where the church is going, rather than allowing a responsive reaction to those that are like, I'm wounded, I'm coming here, I don't want to experience this again. And you're like, yeah, I really don't want you to experience that again either. But sometimes those voices are actually incredibly loud in our heads, and we actually need to hear where God is leading our church much more than where wounded people who walk in are. And by the way, I'm not saying that is your story. I'm hearing myself in that, so that's how I operate. Is how I would operate is like, yeah, I really don't want that to be your story here. Like, and we need to address this. And then we become very whack-a-mole based upon the next person who's coming in with a difficult story into our church. But let me say, that's my experience. I don't want to read that into that's how you were asking it. That's where my brain went for me.
Can I say one more thing on this? Part of the way you phrased the question was, I think it was something like, how do I meet with the pastor? And I really try to avoid using the word "the" in reference to myself. Now at Restoration, I am the only ordained priest on staff at the moment. Hopefully that'll be changing very soon. But I talk about the pastoral team quite a bit, and I try to get the pastoral team language in the congregation. Because again, I want the congregation to know that they have a full team who is willing to meet with them. We also, we've got a page in Church Center, just pastoral office hours, and it lists the pastoral staff and it links out to their office hours. So we try to make sure that we're all, and it's like a Calendly kind of thing. My previous career is in technology, so if you want to talk about setting that up, I'd love to really nerd out about that. But anyway, so we set up this pastoral office out, and it's really easy. Let me tell you, it's great. But what that does is it's getting in front of folks, the pastors who are here to equip and love and serve them.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're hearing is there's lots of different ways to structure these things. There's lots of different ways to do them. The secret sauce isn't like, let's find the way. The secret sauce is, to use the psychological term, the differentiation that we have to carry into these spaces, that we want to respond to people in their hurt, but we don't have to own their hurt as they come in. If you want to put this in spirituality, theological terms, there's some fear of God versus fear of man that's here, right? There are things that people ask us to be responsible for in ministry that we don't actually have to be responsible for. And what I've found at different size points is that it uncovers the places where I've gotten that mixed up. There's actually a spiritual formation that happens in us and ministers, like, oh, this is so hard, I hate this. Is that because I actually think I'm failing God? Or is it just because I can't meet this person the way they need to be met? And that's a hard thing, but that I'm not totally responsible for. It's actually the Holy Spirit that needs to meet them in this place beyond what I'm able to do. There's so much of that spiritual formation work in these transitions, in these size points. You've heard us reframe kind of church size questions as discipleship questions for people that are walking in the doors. And the reality is that not everyone will be able to step into that transformation at the same rate our church is changing. And that's okay. We haven't failed. If we can pastor them well into a place where they can be, that fits them in this season, that's still a good and right thing. It's 3:30. We are happy to stay up here and answer questions. We want to be available to talk through some of this stuff, just not as experts, but as people who think about these things, enjoy these things. It is your free time. So I want to make sure that if you want your free time, you can go get your free time.
Yeah, and Ken, can I say, like,
Closing thought, go.
thank you, Ken.
Get the
Like,
last
man,
word. Come
no,
on.
I know I want you to have thank you, Ken. You put all this together. So many helpful things over the week. You rock, man. The other thing I want to encourage you is if you feel stuck, you are not the first, you are not the last, and God can lead you through it. And so seek help, seek a coach. None of us have arrived. None of us actually probably feel like we actually know what we're doing right now. All four of us, like, I have no idea what I'm doing right now. That is very common as a leader. Find a coach, find someone. And Bishop Ken is also, he wants to see you step into leadership. He does not see that as a failure. He wants you to see you step into leadership. So Ken.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much. If you've got trash and stuff around, I've been asked by the Woodman team, they want to turn this room over, and this is the last time we're going to be here tonight. So, like, grab your stuff and head on out, but feel free to stay and ask questions. I know we didn't get to everything by any means.